Welcome to another episode of Explained by AI. Today we're diving into something pretty intense.
Yeah.
The world of nuclear weapons. And specifically, how these things have gotten seriously powerful over the years.
You got it. We're talking explosions so big, they make the Hiroshima bomb look tiny.
Really?
You see, the bomb that hit Hiroshima was about 15 kilotons.
Kilotons? What's a kiloton?
Think of it like this. 1 kiloton is like 1,000 tons of TNT.
Okay.
All exploding at once. So 15 kilotons, that's like
Yeah.
15,000 tons of TNT going boom. Now hold on to that image.
15,000 tons.
Because modern bombs can be in the megatons range.
Okay.
That's millions of tons of TNT.
Okay, my brain is already starting to melt a little. But let's stick with Hiroshima for a sec,
Sure.
just to wrap our heads around things.
Good idea. Hiroshima is a good starting point because it gives us a sense of scale.
Right.
That 15 kiloton bomb was devastating.
Yeah.
And it helps us understand just how much more powerful things have become.
Right, so Hiroshima, 15 kilotons, that's our baseline.
Yeah.
What comes next?
Well, let's jump ahead to one of the big guys in the U.S. arsenal.
Okay.
The B-83 bomb. Picture this. It's roughly the size of a small car.
Wow. A bomb the size of a car, that's already scary.
And it gets scarier. The B-83 packs a punch of 1.2 megatons.
Whoa!
Do the math.
Okay.
That's 80 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima.
80 times.
Okay.
That's officially mind-blowing.
It is, and this thing is designed to do more than just explode on the surface.
What?
The B-83 can actually burrow underground before detonating, making it especially effective against bunkers.
Oh, wow.
It's delivered by aircraft, basically a gravity bomb, but the impact is anything but basic.
So if we're talking about bunkers being built to withstand these things, I'm starting to see why that's such a hot topic.
Right.
But tell me if the B-83 is that crazy powerful.
Yeah.
What else is out there?
Let's shift our focus to something that can reach pretty much anywhere in the world.
Okay.
The Trident II missile. Imagine this. It launches from a submarine deep underwater.
Underwater.
And can hit targets on the other side of the planet.
That's like something out of a spy movie.
It is pretty high-tech. And here's the kicker.
Okay.
The Trident II doesn't just carry one warhead.
Whoa.
It can carry up to 8, each aimed at a different location.
Hold on. Multiple warheads on one missile. How does that even work?
Each of these warheads is called an MIRV.
MIRV.
Short for Multiple Independently Targetable Reentry Vehicle.
Okay.
Basically, the missile releases these MIRVs, and they spread out, each heading for its own target.
So it's like a superpowered shotgun blast, but with nuclear warheads.
You got it. And each of those warheads on a Trident II packs about 475 kilotons.
Oh, wow.
Roughly 30 times the power of the Hiroshima bomb.
Okay, my head is spinning. If one Trident II has 8 of those warheads,
Right.
that's, oh man, that's a lot of firepower.
You're not wrong. And to add to that, the U.S. has 280 of these Trident II missiles.
280?
Each with those multiple warheads ready to go on submarines hidden beneath the waves.
Okay, I think I need a minute to process all of this.
Mm-hmm.
We've gone from a car-sized bomb to missiles that can hit anywhere in the world. Is it just me? Or is the scale of this stuff getting kind of hard to grasp?
It's not just you. These numbers are huge.
Yeah.
And the destructive power is almost unimaginable. But we're just getting started. Let's hop over to China and check out what they've got in their arsenal.
Oh, there's more. I have a feeling this is going to get even more intense.
You're probably right about that China has the DF-5C missile.
Okay.
It's another one of those giant ICBMs, similar in size to the Russian Satan missile, which we'll talk about later. This one can carry up to 12 warheads.
Oh, more warheads. Okay, this is officially getting out of hand.
Each one of those warheads on the DF-5C has a yield of 1 megaton.
A megaton.
That's 66 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. Imagine 12 of those all hitting the same target.
Whoa, hold on. Let me do the math here. That would be 12 megatons, right?
You got it.
800 times the power of Hiroshima.
It's hard to even comprehend the kind of devastation that would cause. And China is estimated to have between 20 and 30 of these DF-5C missiles.
I'm starting to feel like we're going down a rabbit hole here, and it keeps getting deeper and deeper.
We are. And this rabbit hole goes even deeper when we start looking at what Russia has developed.
Oh, boy.
Let's start with the R-36M2 missile. They don't call it Satan for nothing.
Satan. Okay, now I'm really nervous.
This thing is a monster. It's over 106 feet tall and weighs almost 500,000 pounds. That's like a whole building flying through the air.
A flying building packed with nuclear warheads. This is getting out of control.
The R-36M2 carries 10 warheads, each with a yield of up to 1 megaton. That's 666 times the power of the Hiroshima bomb.
Okay. I think my brain just officially broke.
And there are even some versions of the R-36 that had a single 20 megaton warhead.
Oh my goodness.
Imagine that over 1,300 times the power of Hiroshima, Russia has about 46 of these missiles in operation.
So even though they don't have as many as the U.S. Trident missiles,
yeah,
each one of those Russian missiles is like a whole different level of terrifying.
Exactly. And just when you thought it couldn't get any crazier, there's the RS-28 Sarmat missile nickname. You guessed it, Satan II.
Seriously, they went with Satan II. That's almost funny in a really dark kind of way.
It does sound a bit like a movie title, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But trust me, the RS-28 is no laughing matter. It's designed to slip past missile defenses.
Oh, wow.
And can carry up to 15 warheads plus decoys to confuse enemy systems.
So not only are the explosions bigger,
right,
but they're getting harder to stop, too. This is getting out of hand.
But it's a serious situation, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And while the exact payload is classified, some experts think it could theoretically carry a 50-megaton warhead.
Hold on, 50 megatons. Right. Isn't that, wait, wasn't the Tsar Bomba the crazy powerful bomb they tested way back when, 50 megatons?
You're right. The Tsar Bomba was the most powerful nuclear weapon ever detonated.
Right.
And it was a 50-megaton blast. That's the kind of power we're talking about with the RS-28 Satan II.
Well, I think I need to sit down for a minute.
Yeah.
We've gone for 15 kilotons with Hiroshima.
It's unbelievable.
To potentially 50 megatons with the RS-28? That's a jump that's hard to wrap your head around.
It is. And it just goes to show how much the scale of these weapons has escalated since the early days.
Right.
Even a single bomb nowadays can cause unimaginable destruction.
This has been super informative, but honestly, it's a little scary, too.
Yeah.
A lot to take in.
I understand. It's important to be aware of just how powerful these weapons are and what could happen if they were ever used.
Yeah.
It's a serious thought.
It is. But for now, I think I've reached my limit for nuclear facts.
Fair enough.
What?
We've covered a lot of ground today, from that relatively small Hiroshima bomb to these behemoths like the Satan II missile.
And we've seen how these weapons have gotten bigger.
Right.
More powerful and more sophisticated over time. It's almost like well, I guess it's not almost.
Yeah.
It is a very dangerous arms race.
You could definitely say that.
Yeah.
And we've only scratched the surface of this topic.
I have a feeling we're just getting started. But for now, we've reached the end of part 1 of our deep dive.
Ugh.
I hope you found it as fascinating as I did, even if it was a bit unnerving at times.
I agree. It's important to be aware of the realities of these weapons.
Yeah.
Even if it's not the most comfortable thing to think about.
Well said. We'll be back soon with part 2 of our deep dive. Until then, stay curious and keep exploring.
Sounds good. It's definitely been a wild ride so far. And, you know, you hit the nail on the head earlier when you mentioned an arms race.
Yeah.
That's a huge part of what's going on here.
It seems like every time we talk about a new weapon, it's bigger and scarier than the last one.
Exactly. It's like this pattern throughout history with weapons. Someone comes up with something powerful, and then everyone else tries to build something even bigger and better. It's like a really dangerous game of one-upmanship.
So it's a vicious cycle. One country builds a big bomb, then others feel threatened. Right. So they build even bigger ones, and it just keeps going.
You got it. And with nuclear weapons, the stakes are unbelievably high. We're talking about the potential to wipe out entire cities or even countries. It's a level of destruction unlike anything else in human history.
It makes you wonder where it all ends.
Yeah.
If we keep making these weapons bigger and more powerful, will we ever reach a point where they're just too dangerous to control?
That's a question a lot of people are asking.
Yeah.
The possibility of someone using these weapons, whether by accident or on purpose, is a very real threat.
Yeah.
And it's something we need to be incredibly careful about.
It's pretty scary to think about.
Yeah.
But for now, I guess we need to focus on understanding these weapons and how they work. The more we know, the better we can talk about how to control them and prevent something terrible from happening.
I agree. Knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
And in this case, knowledge can help us prevent a global catastrophe.
Okay. So we've talked a lot about the bombs themselves. But how do they actually get to their targets?
Yeah.
You mentioned that the B-83 is a gravity bomb dropped from a plane.
Right.
But what about these missiles? How do those work?
Most modern nuclear missiles are what we call ballistic missiles.
Ballistic missiles, what does that mean?
Imagine a baseball being thrown.
Yeah.
It goes up in an arc and then comes back down, right? Well, a ballistic missile is kind of like that, but on a much larger scale. It gets launched into space and then comes back down to Earth, aiming for its target.
So they're not like airplanes that can steer and change direction.
Nope. They follow a set path that's calculated before they launch, and that makes them really hard to shoot down.
I bet. And what about those multiple warheads we talked about?
Right.
How do those work with ballistic missiles?
Things get even more interesting with those multiple warheads.
Okay.
They're officially called multiple independently targetable reentry vehicles.
Right.
But everyone just calls them MIRVs.
Yeah.
Basically, when the missile is high above the Earth, it releases these MIRVs.
Oh, instead of one big warhead, you have several smaller ones?
Yes.
Each going to a different place.
Exactly. Each MIRV can be programmed to hit a specific target, spreading the destructive power over a wider area.
So it's not just about having bigger bombs.
Right.
It's also about hitting more targets at once.
You got it. It's a combination of brute force and precision, which makes these weapons incredibly dangerous.
Thinking back to that Trident II missile with its 8 warheads.
Yeah.
That's a lot of potential targets for just one missile.
It is. And those 8 warheads, each with 475 kilotons of power, could cause massive damage. Imagine that kind of firepower spread across multiple cities or military bases.
That's a pretty sobering thought.
Yeah.
And knowing that there are hundreds of these missiles deployed around the world, it's clear that the potential for destruction is huge.
Absolutely. That's why things like diplomacy and cooperation between countries are so important. We need to find ways to prevent these weapons from ever being used.
You're right. But even with diplomacy, it's hard to ignore how many nuclear weapons there are. We've talked about the U.S., the UK, China, and Russia. Are there any other countries with nuclear weapons?
Yes, there are. 9 countries are known to have nuclear weapons. The U.S., Russia, the UK, France, China, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea.
So it's not just a few superpowers, but a whole bunch of different countries with different reasons for having these weapons.
Exactly. And that makes it even harder to control these weapons and prevent them from spreading. Every country has its own ideas about nuclear weapons, which makes it tough to get everyone to agree on things like disarmament or non-proliferation.
It sounds like a very complicated situation. It makes me wonder, though, what actually happens when a nuclear bomb explodes? I know it's a big explosion, but what else?
It's a great question. And it's important to understand that a nuclear explosion doesn't just cause one type of damage.
Okay.
There are several different effects, and they're all devastating.
Like what?
First, you have the blast itself,
Okay.
which is caused by the rapid expansion of hot gases from the explosion.
Right.
This creates a powerful shock wave that can flatten buildings, shatter windows, and cause widespread damage for miles.
That shockwave sounds incredibly destructive.
It is. It can travel faster than the speed of sound. And the change in pressure is so intense it can crush structures and even injure people who are far away.
Wow, that's terrifying.
And then there's the heat from the explosion. We call this thermal radiation.
Right.
And it's like a massive burst of heat and light. It can cause instant burns, start fires, and even melt materials over a large area.
So it's not just the explosion itself, but also the intense heat that comes with it.
You got it. And the heat is so powerful, it can burn people who aren't even directly in the path of the blast wave.
I never thought about it that way. That's scary.
And as if the blast and the heat weren't bad enough.
Oh, no.
There's also ionizing radiation, which includes things called gamma rays and neutrons.
I've heard of those, but what do they actually do?
Ionizing radiation is really dangerous.
Okay.
It can damage cells in your body, cause mutations, and lead to radiation sickness, which can be fatal.
So even if you survive the initial explosion and the heat, you could still be exposed to this radiation and get sick.
Exactly. And the effects of radiation can last for years or even decades, causing long-term health problems like cancer.
That's a lot to take in. It makes you realize that nuclear weapons aren't just about the big explosions, but also about the long-term effects they have on people and the environment.
You're absolutely right. And there's another thing we need to talk about, fallout.
Oh, yeah, fallout. I remember learning about that in school, but I don't really remember what it is.
Think of it like radioactive dust.
Yeah.
When a nuclear bomb explodes, it throws a lot of this dust into the air. And this dust can travel for hundreds or even thousands of miles carried by the wind.
So even if you're far away from the blast, you could still be affected by this fallout.
Exactly. It can land on the ground, in the water, and even on food. And if people eat or breathe in this fallout, they can get sick from radiation poisoning.
It sounds like nuclear weapons are a much more complex threat than I initially thought.
Yeah.
There are so many layers of destruction, and the consequences are far-reaching.
You're right. It's not just about the size of the explosion, but also about the long-term damage to health, the environment, and even society itself.
This is a lot to process. But thank you for explaining it all to me. It's
Right.
helped me understand the true impact of nuclear weapons much better.
You're welcome. I think it's important for everyone to understand this stuff,
Yeah.
especially since we're dealing with the threat of nuclear proliferation and the possibility of nuclear war.
I agree.
Yeah.
And speaking of those threats, there's another aspect of modern nuclear weapons we should talk about. The growing interest in smaller, tactical nuclear weapons.
That's an important point. In the past, the focus was mainly on huge strategic nuclear weapons,
All right.
meant to destroy entire cities or countries. But now some countries are developing smaller nuclear weapons that they say could be used on a battlefield.
So instead of trying to wipe out everything,
Yeah,
they're thinking about using nuclear weapons in a more limited way.
that's the idea. They argue that these smaller tactical nuclear weapons could be used to attack specific military targets without causing as much damage to civilians and cities. At least that's what they say.
But wouldn't using any kind of nuclear weapon, big or small, be incredibly dangerous?
Absolutely. That's the problem. The line between tactical and strategic nuclear weapons isn't very clear. Using any nuclear weapon would have terrible consequences
Right.
and could easily lead to a much bigger conflict.
It sounds like a really risky strategy. And wouldn't there still be fallout from a smaller nuclear weapon?
You're right. Even a small nuclear explosion would release a lot of radiation.
Yeah.
And the long-term effects could be disastrous.
It makes you wonder why anyone would even think about using these weapons.
It's a complicated issue with a lot of different factors involved. But in the end, it comes down to a dangerous mix of military strategy, political maneuvering, and fear.
It's definitely a lot to think about. Thanks for explaining this to me. It's something I hadn't really considered before.
You're welcome. I think it's crucial to be aware of all the different aspects of nuclear weapons, from how they work to the complex world of international relations that surrounds them.
I agree. So we've talked about the bombs themselves, how they get to their targets, the devastating effects they have,
Yeah.
and the idea of these tactical nuclear weapons. What else is there to consider?
Well, there's another important aspect we haven't touched on yet.
Okay.
The psychological impact of nuclear weapons.
What do you mean by that?
Think about it. The possibility of a nuclear war has had a huge effect on our culture and how we think.
Okay.
The idea that we could destroy ourselves at any moment has created a lot of anxiety and fear.
I get that.
Hmm.
It's hard not to feel anxious when you think about what could happen in a nuclear war.
Exactly. And this anxiety has shown up in a lot of different ways, from the duck and cover drills we used to do in school
Right.
to all the movies and books about the end of the world.
It's interesting how the threat of nuclear war has become part of our culture. It's like this background noise that's always there, even if we don't always think about it.
That's a good way to put it. And this underlying fear can actually affect how we make decisions, both individually and as a society.
So it's not just the physical danger of these weapons, but also the mental and emotional toll they take on us.
Exactly. The fear of nuclear war can influence who we vote for, how we feel about other countries, and even how we interact with each other.
That's pretty sobering.
Yeah.
It makes you realize how important it is to talk about these things openly and honestly.
Yeah.
We can't just pretend the problem doesn't exist and hope it goes away.
I agree. We need to talk about nuclear weapons in a thoughtful and informed way
Right.
if we want to find solutions and make the world a safer place.
You're right. So today we've covered a lot of ground, from the nuts and bolts of nuclear weapons to their impact on our culture and how we think.
We have. And it's been a fascinating, if somewhat unsettling, conversation.
It has. But I think it's important to remember that we're not powerless in the face of this threat. We can make choices both as individuals and as a global community to reduce the risk of nuclear war and work towards a more peaceful future.
I couldn't agree more. It's a challenge, but it's not impossible. And I believe we have a moral obligation to try.
Well said. We'll be back soon with the third and final part of our deep dive into the world of nuclear weapons.
I'm looking forward to it. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged. The future of our planet might depend on it.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the world of nuclear weapons. It's been a pretty intense journey so far, wouldn't you say?
It has. We've covered a lot of ground, from the sheer scale of these weapons to the potential consequences of actually using them.
We've definitely learned a lot. But before we wrap up, there's one big piece of the puzzle we haven't talked about yet. Nuclear deterrence.
Ah, yes, nuclear deterrence. It's one of the most baited concepts when it comes to nuclear weapons.
To be honest, I'm a little fuzzy on what it actually means. Can you break it down for me?
Sure. Nuclear deterrence is basically the idea that if a country knows it'll be hit back with nuclear weapons, if it uses them first, it won't use them at all. It's like a really scary standoff where nobody wants to make the first move.
So it's like saying, If you nuke me, I'll nuke you back, and we'll both be toast.
That's the gist of it. The theory is that this threat of retaliation, of being completely destroyed in return, is enough to prevent any country from using nuclear weapons in the first place.
It kind of makes sense,
Oh.
but it also seems risky. What if someone miscalculates or gets desperate? It only takes one mistake to trigger something terrible.
You're right. There are a lot of potential problems with nuclear deterrence. It assumes everyone will always act rationally and in their own best interest, which isn't always the case. History is full of examples of leaders making impulsive or emotional decisions, even when the stakes are incredibly high.
It's like a big game of chicken, but with the fate of the world hanging in the balance. One wrong move and it's all over.
Exactly. And there's always the risk of miscommunication or misunderstanding. What if one country misinterprets the actions of another, or there's a technical glitch that leads to an accidental launch? Those kinds of scenarios keep a lot of people up at night.
It sounds like there are a lot of ways things could go wrong with a system that relies on everyone being perfectly rational and predictable all the time.
That's one of the biggest criticisms of nuclear deterrence. And then there's the ethical question. Is it really okay to threaten mass destruction as a way to prevent conflict?
Yeah, that's a tough one. It doesn't feel right to base peace on the threat of wiping out millions of people.
It's a moral dilemma with no easy answers. But despite all its flaws, nuclear deterrence has been the main strategy for avoiding nuclear war for decades.
So it's worked so far. At least we haven't had a nuclear war since World War II.
That's true, but it's a delicate balance, and we can't just assume it'll always work. We need to constantly reassess our strategies, work on clear communication between countries, and strive for the ultimate goal of getting rid of these weapons altogether.
It sounds like a long and difficult process.
It is, but it's a process we need to commit to if we want to ensure a future for humanity. The stakes are simply too high to ignore.
You're right. It's easy to get overwhelmed by all this, but we can't let fear paralyze us. We need to use our knowledge, our empathy, and our collective wisdom to find a way forward.
I couldn't agree more. We need to work together to create a world where nuclear weapons are a relic of the past, not a looming threat.
That's a goal worth striving for. Well, we've covered a lot in this deep dive, and I want to thank you for sharing your expertise with us.
It's been my pleasure. These conversations are essential for raising awareness and getting people thinking about these complex issues.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this journey. We hope you learned something new and will continue to explore these important topics. Remember, knowledge is power, and when it comes to nuclear weapons, knowledge could be the key to our survival. Do you have any topic that you would like to have explained? Drop in the comments.